You can now hear Movie Heaven, Movie Hell on Stitcher. Stitcher is radio on demand. Listen anytime, anywhere. Stitcher is an award-winning free app that lets you listen to all your favourite shows, plus discover from 20,000 news, entertainment and sports shows. You can also create your own custom playlists. Stitcher is available on iOS, Android, Nook, iPad and in over 4 million car dashboards. It's on demand and it's on the go. No downloading, no syncing, no wasted memory. You can stream your favourite podcasts from Stitcher. Don't have Stitcher? Download it free today at Stitcher.com or in the App Store. And please leave us a review and rating on Stitcher. Thank you. Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell with me, Simon Aiken, and
I'm Keith Isles, and we are both independent filmmakers who enjoy discussing movies and related media. And for this series of special episodes celebrating 40 years of Star Wars, we're really pleased to welcome back to the podcast filmmaker Charles de Lauzirika. So welcome back, Charles.
Thanks for having me and for pronouncing my name better than last time. That's great.
Practice makes perfect, you know.
Yeah.
How are you anyway? You well?
I'm well. I'm just I'm loving that it's the holidays and can kind of slow down and enjoy life a bit. And it's a good time because it's Star Wars season too. You know, we have a new movie coming out, so I'm very excited about that.
Absolutely, and that's why we thought we'd do these episodes to talk about Star Wars, because first of all, it's hard to believe it's been 40 years, which is quite scary in itself. But also, you know, we seem to be in this new wave of Star Wars, if it ever went away at all. And so much has been said about Star Wars, and there's so many podcasts out there about it and conversations that we thought, for this one, we'll kind of make it about what Star Wars means to us, and we'll sort of focus on the original trilogy and sort of where we were and what that meant for us. So as you're the guest, Charles, would you like to start on that one?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'll just start at the beginning, which was my first memory of Star Wars, which is very vague because I just kind of feel like I just showed up at the theater opening weekend at the Man Chinese in Hollywood with my dad. I don't really remember much of Star Wars before then. It was just sort of like everyone was just sort of like being summoned, almost like on a cosmic level. It was almost like actually like more like Close Encounters, where you just had like this thing that was drawing you to this one site to see this one miraculous thing. And I do remember being in the courtyard of the Chinese theater where they had the posters and the lobby cards on display, and they had lobby cards from the film. And this would be like sort of a major spoiler today, but back then one of the lobby cards was Han and Luke in the throne room, the Rebel throne room at the end of the film with Chewie behind them. And I thought, and not knowing anything about the story, and I was like 7 years old or whatever. Or no, I was 9 years old. Not knowing the story, I thought, oh, those two guys must have been captured by this giant space ape, and he's taking them to his leader. And it's like that was like my imagined story, because I didn't think of the end of the movie, you know, where they're being rewarded for, you know, defeating the Empire. So that was my first memory of Star Wars. And then, of course, going into the theater and then just like the electricity in the air. I think everyone knew. It was just weird. It was like this weird kind of like kind of almost spiritual, cosmic, religious thing happening where people were like, this is special. We don't know why, but it is. And then when that, you know, the opening Fox fanfare hit, and then the Lucasfilm logo hit, and then a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it was almost like this anticipation building. And then boom, the logo explodes on the screen, and then boom, the Star Destroyer flies overhead. It was just like we were being destroyed and rebuilt as like new beings. It was like this very strange experience. I just felt like I was reborn on that day, and I've been a Star Wars nerd ever since. It is I mean, I hate to keep going back to like it being a religion, but it kind of is. I mean, I really do feel like I embrace it on a very deep level that I haven't embraced many other forms of pop culture.
Well, over here in Britain, Jedi is official religion.
Mm-hmm. And so it should be. Yeah. So it should be. I mean, without wanting to sound too dramatic when I say this, but you know, for me, Star Wars has literally informed. It has made me the person who I am now, because for me, it was literally the beginning of everything. You know, I'm always going on about you know, age and how I wish I was younger and all this sort of crap. But all joking aside, I'm actually really pleased that I grew up in this sort of Star Wars generation, because like my dad, he sort of grew up with Westerns and war films. And I guess the new generation, it's kind of Harry Potter and, you know, Fantastic Beasts and stuff like that. But, you know, Star Wars for me was literally the beginning of everything, because it was the first film I ever saw at the cinema. I don't remember exactly when it was. I was very young. I know that it had already had Lucas's first ever change made to it, which meant it was Episode 4, A New Hope, at the point where I saw it. And I remember that, you know, my mum took me. Star Wars and Superman were the films that mum took me to see, and dad took me to see Star Trek: The Motion Picture and Flash Gordon. Obviously, the latter two coming out as a direct follow-up to the cinematic success of Star Wars. But it was also the first time I'd seen anything about the making of movies. They had on television around that same time the making of Star Wars, and that kind of generated my interest in films. But also just all the things you do as a kid. The first ever comics I had were Star Wars comics, were Star Wars Weekly, long before I had any DC or Marvel comics, you know, any superhero ones. The first novel I ever read was Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was an Alan Dean Foster novel that came out as a follow-up to Star Wars before Empire Strikes Back came out. The first toys I ever had, first figurines, were definitely Star Wars action figures. Prior to that, I think I might have had a Action Man, which you guys called G.I. Joe out there. I had one of them, and I know I had a sort of $6 Million Man doll, but I can't remember whether that was before or at the same time or after. But definitely the sort of 4-inch action figures and spaceships came out of that before it was just toy cars. My first gun, again, I think I'd had a cowboy gun, but my first gun was like a Han Solo blaster, and I got a lightsaber when they came out. It was the first time I became interested in radio dramas, which is something that I'm now really into. But the Star Wars radio drama was a big part of my life. And, you know, as I grew up and went through Star Wars and started to, you know, move from youth, my first crush was probably Princess Leia in Return of the Jedi, for obvious reasons, right? So it was the beginning of everything, literally.
Well,
what about you, Simon?
Well, being the youngest of us three, I was literally 1 when it came out the first time.
Oh wow!
But it was the first film I saw at the cinema. I believe I was, you know, that's why I wanted to see, and I must have seen it on the second run, because I kind of vaguely remember seeing it in the summer. And yeah, like we both, Star Wars has always been a massive part of my life. Like you, Keith, first toys I had were Star Wars. I had the figures. I had the dolls. Yeah, I remember having quite a big R2-D2 that I would actually could fit the figures into and make into another ship. I had the cardboard Death Star, which had the garbage garbage bit with, it was just like a bit of cardboard that you moved left and right. And I think like most of us, I think we played with the toys so much that they got lost or destroyed and so it was the first film I saw, and I remember it more being on TV. I remember being one of the first films I wanted to see so much on TV. I remember where the ad breaks were as well when it was shown on ITV.
Yeah.
And it was there for most of my life. I mean, I think about when I was about 8 or 9, after Return of the Jedi had long been gone. There was a kind of a break. Other things came along. There was like Transformers and other kinds of toys that came along that sort of took the place of Star Wars. But then with the jump a few years later, when you had the special editions coming out, I got back into Star Wars in a massive way. And what started that off for me was reading Heir to the Empire, which is it was one of the first officially licensed books since Splinter of the Mind's Eye. And reading that, getting into it, and then I got into collecting the figures again. We had the Power of the Force figures, which had a very buff Luke Skywalker, looking more like he did on the poster than the actual figure itself. And I just remember from 97 to about 2000, Phantom Menace did kind of kill it off for me. I was a massive collector. I would go around trying to collect, all the figures, all the toys, the vehicles, comics, all the Dark Horse comics like Dark Empire and all the there was loads of different ones. I even had the classic Star Wars, which were stories that were reprinted from the Marvel run. And I had a massive Star Wars collection, which in the end I had to sell only a few years ago to get myself through being unemployed. But I was I still am a big fan. I mean, I enjoy these new films coming out of Disney, and I think it's always going to be there. I mean, even if maybe the quality starts to drop, I mean, I still, it'll still be part of my life.
Charles, do you think we were lucky to sort of grow up in the Star Wars generation, if you like, with that original trilogy of films?
Yeah, I think it was a very magical time, and especially for kids, I think it fueled our imaginations to express ourselves. Not just buy toys and obsess over, Jawas and droids. It was like, what can we do? And I think that was what was very inspirational about the making of Star Wars documentary that was on television that I remember seeing, like the very first images of, TIE fighter miniatures being blown up against blue screens. And when I was a kid, I'm like, wow, that looks so cool. What is it? I don't even know what I'm looking at. So I want to learn more about it. And just that notion of like a kind of a master wizard revealing his tricks for you, you're like, well, I want to try those tricks, and that's what was so great about Star Wars for me, was not just that it was massively rousing entertainment, and not that it was like this kind of geeky phenomenon that we could all like buy into, but also that it inspired you to do your own thing. And I really appreciated that. And I think when I look back on my, relationship with Star Wars, the parts that I don't want to say I regret, but the parts that I wish that I hadn't been so obsessed with were kind of like the toys and the fan-ish side of it. And I wish I was more focused on being inspired to, use those lessons of filmmaking and do more of my own thing, which, I've slowly been doing, but I kind of wish I hadn't divided my time between being a fan and an aspiring filmmaker. I wish I just went straight to aspiring filmmaker, but I think that's part of the blessing and the curse of Star Wars, is that it's a thing that it takes over you as you think you are taking over it. And I feel like it is a very kind of complicated or increasingly complicated emotional and psychological relationship that I have with Star Wars that now I think I feel, fingers crossed, I have under control. But I went through many years, even decades, I guess, being just obsessed with it, on a fanatical level. And therefore I think I feel like I have a lot of knowledge about, the movies and some of the expanded universe stuff. And I have a lot of love for it, but I also feel like I also learned a lot of filmmaking techniques and skills from Star Wars that then dovetailed into other movies and other experiences. So, it's not a love-hate. It's a love-like, I think, situation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I remember when I was at school, and this must have been after the whole trilogy had aired, but there used to be a documentary on the BBC called Horizon, and there was one particular episode called How to Film the Impossible, and what it covered the special effects aspects of not just Star Wars, but it also covered things like E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, etc. But it showed all of those wonderful craftspeople at work at ILM, and it showed you how they would do composite shots and how they'd work with miniatures and how they'd use motion control and how they'd use matte paintings and all of that sort of thing. And I remember just we had a VHS machine here at the time, so I actually recorded or got Dad to record the episode, and I remember watching that so many times and just being really excited to think that grown-ups would actually tell these stories and make these films using models, which were effectively like toys, but would actually film them to tell these stories and create these worlds. And I remember just feeling so inspired by that, and I felt like it made it okay for me not to want to let go of my toys as I started to get older, if that makes sense. But I mean, I never pursued visual effects in any way, shape or form. It just became an interest of mine, which obviously most of that has gone digital now anyway. It certainly was one of, and there were other films and stuff that inspired me, but it was certainly one of many films that inspired me to want to become a filmmaker and become interested in filmmaking and telling stories and creating things for absolute sure.
Well, so according to my family, we have a relative who actually worked on the models of Star Wars back in the 70s. But for the life of me, I can't remember who he was or if they sort of mentioned his name. But there is the idea that one of my family members did work on it, which is that's for me is amazing.
Yeah, you want to be following up that one.
Yeah, well, it's one of those stories where it's kind of vague, so it may be true, it may not. I prefer to think it's true and just leave it at that.
Fair enough. So Charles, what are your thoughts then? I mean, see, you've said it very well about how you've got this sort of almost like love-hate relationship with Star Wars over the years, etc. I mean, how are your feelings when, as we sort of approached the late 90s, when Star Wars started to become more popular again, and they started re-releasing the special editions and things of that nature? What were your thoughts on that side of it?
Well, I mean, it was interesting because I remember when I actually went to a charity benefit premiere of Return of the Jedi a few days before it actually opened. So I was, in full bloom as a Star Wars nerd. And I was sitting there at the end, and I became incredibly sad because I realized that was it. That was the end. Like, this thing that I was so madly in love with was over. Because it became clear that, Lucas didn't really want to continue at that point. And, all the articles said, this is it, this is the final chapter. And, even though it wasn't, it still felt like it. And it was, for many, many years, obviously. But like the rest of the 80s, and there actually was a little glimmer of hope in 1985 when the first Power of the Force line of figures came out in toys, which built upon the original Kenner figures. These aren't the muscle-bound ones from the 90s. These are like there was a series called Power of the Force before the next Power of the Force line. Mm-hmm. But then it was like the Dark Ages. Then it was like nothing was really going on. And I kind of let go, and I kind of started thinking, well, all right, I'll move on with my life, even though I still love it. And then, you had the little hints with Heir to the Empire and things like that. But when it was like 1996-ish, I think, when they announced Shadows of the Empire, right? That was the multimedia. It was the game. It was the book. It was the soundtrack. It was the comics. It was the toys. It was like the first sort of, at the time, sort of in canon new chapter for Star Wars, which took place between Empire and Jedi. And that felt like, oh, we're going to, we might be getting back into the game a bit for us fans to enjoy Star Wars again. But, that was kind of like a mixed bag. I thought the game was a lot of fun. The N64 game I really enjoyed, and I played quite a bit. The book and the story and all that, it was, it was okay. It just felt like another sort of like in-betweener story that wasn't like massively important to the overall saga or the, what we knew then as the saga. But there was always the hint over the years that maybe the prequels are coming, maybe they're going to start working, and there were always a lot of rumors. And I don't know. It's like when I saw the very first, it was Time Magazine. I remember they had a very tiny picture of the very first production art from Phantom Menace, and it was of it was like this on Coruscant, and it was of like this sort of transport shuttle on a landing platform, and that's all it was. But it felt like, oh, now it's going to be real. There really are going to be more Star Wars movies. So at that point, my love sort of renewed, and my interest re-energized, and suddenly I was back in. So much so that when they had the very first, I don't think it was called Force Friday back then, but the very first, when the toys went on sale for Phantom Menace, I was out there with all the other maniacs in line, loading up on Darth Maul this and Battle Droid that. And you think, oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be just like it was before. And just to show you how nuts I was about the Star Wars movies coming back, I was living at the time in 1999. I was living in Hollywood. I had an apartment within walking distance of the Chinese Theater. And about a month before the movie was going to open, a line formed. And it was these guys that were just like camping out for a month ahead of time, but they were doing it in the name of some charity. And I went down there to check it out, and I signed up for the line. Now, the thing is, I wasn't going to spend a month in line. There's no way in hell I was going to do that for any movie. But I signed up, and they would let you kind of like log in and log out so you could amass hours in line. And I have to admit, I cheated a bit here and there just because I live so close. I could go home and take a shower and not just be stinking up the sidewalk like so many other people were doing. But it was just this amazing. I think I called it Force Stock. Like it was like Woodstock, but it was Force Stock. It was just crazy nerds that looked like they were basically like hippies out in the mud, except it was for Star Wars. So it was fun, and I remember opening night, we all went in, and I had got great seats for the very first midnight show, and I was pumped, and we were all like, there's tons of people with lightsabers in the audience, and it was like a rock concert. And you could almost tell immediately, like the air was being slowly let out of the balloon. And when Jar Jar has that terrible line as he's kind of following Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan through the woods of Naboo, he kind of says, "Excuse me," and you could actually a lady about 5 rows behind me actually said, "Oh my God!" And then that just was like poison. Everyone sort of like their eyes and face palming, and they're like, "Oh no, what happened?" And then it was like 2 more movies of the same thing after that. It was just like, oh, what a we came all this way. We took the pilgrimage. We came back, and we were rewarded with the prequels. So that was a big wake up call. In fact, I walked out of the theater, and a reporter from the LA Times was out on the street, and she asked me, what'd you think? And I said, well, I want to thank George Lucas for inspiring me to become a filmmaker, and now I want to thank him again for waking me up and snapping me out of Star Wars, because I was sort of like, I'm done. It's like no way I could follow with this, and yet of course I did, because it's also an addiction, and you can't let it go that easily. But it's definitely been a roller coaster, of ups and downs with Star Wars. But I think now it's a bit more. I feel a bit more grounded in my love of it. Like I can kind of keep it at a certain distance. I can still enjoy it, but it doesn't control my life.
Well, I found personally as a collector there was just too much stuff, and every year there's more and more stuff flooding the market. So there's all these different books, and there's all these different figures you can collect, and different variations of the same figure, and it absolutely just got like, well, I'm just going to spend all my money on this stuff, and I'll never have like a full collection. I think out of all the things that I did keep after selling all my stuff was actually a book of like Star Wars collectibles up to about 98. So you had all the original stuff, and it had everything in there. It had all the figures, it had all the like pillowcases, bed covers, everything that was ever made of Star Wars from the 70s to the late 90s. And for me, I kept that book because it's just like, like I can now look back at what I used to collect and stuff, and enjoy it from afar without having to go through all the pain of, not only paying that money to get this stuff, but actually the search for this stuff, because back in the 90s it was really difficult to get this stuff. We didn't have eBay, so you actually had to hit the pavement, go to shops, hunt around, and try and find this stuff. And some of the stuff had to be imported as well from the States. So it was I enjoyed all that. I enjoyed the sort of the hunt for all this stuff, but I look back at it.
Yeah, I enjoyed the hunt quite a bit, actually. I mean, I would go to when I was like, well, I started collecting, like seriously collecting. I mean, collecting, like keeping things mint in the box, collecting.
Yeah.
From like, I don't know, age 11 or 12. I mean, from early on, I recognized like I want to keep this stuff mint, and I would go to swap meets, and flea markets, and all these like back channel ways of trying to find things. And back then, like you could go like in 1981 or 82, you could go to some store out in the middle of nowhere, and they would still have original 1977 Star Wars, 78 Star Wars toys out, that you could still get mint. So you could actually find those things. And a funny aside, in 1985 or 86, actually, I was in London, and I went to Elstree Studios to try to talk my way into a tour or something. And I kind of got close, actually. I got a very nice letter from Robert Watts at Lucasfilm, and then he wrote me a nice letter, and they gave me a couple Temple of Doom t-shirts. It was nice. But there was a toy store near Elstree that I just happened to wander into to kill time. And they had a whole wall of carded Yak Face and Anakin Skywalker figures that are, now are worth like tons of money. And they were like trying to sell, they were on sale. Like they were trying to get rid of them. And of course, if I could go back in time and tell my 18-year-old self, throw away all your clothes, take your suitcases, and load your suitcases up with these things, you'd be rich,
I had exactly the same thing. I know the toy shop you're talking about. It was there up to about 99, funnily enough. It sort of closed just before Phantom Menace came out. But there was actually a lot of shops in the local area that had a lot of Star Wars stuff up to the mid-90s. And it was only the fact that I didn't have much money as a kid, I couldn't buy them. But I mean, we're talking Millennium Falcons in the box, AT-ATs, all these sort of big collectible toys, and they were just there on the shelf gathering dust. Nobody wanted them, and of course, when suddenly the collecting boom kicked off, of course those shops had gone, or they had got rid of their stock. It's yeah. It's funny to think there was that phase in between the end of Return of the Jedi and up towards near the special editions, where there was all these Star Wars toys in shops just gathering dust and nobody wanted them, and now of course they're worth a lot of money.
Well, I got to a point where I was trying to like have the world's biggest collection. I mean, no joke. I mean, my room when I was, like 13, 14, 15 was basically a Star Wars shop. I mean, it was just loaded with mint stuff. And then having, like I was mentioning earlier, we're going to like swap meets and things. I met this guy named Steve Sansweet, who was, digging through people's, bins and things looking for Star Wars stuff. And, as we know now, he became like a huge force in Star Wars collecting and a big super fan. And he worked for Lucasfilm, and now he's got Rancho Obi-Wan, which I think is unquestionably the world's biggest Star Wars collection. But back then he was living in LA in Silver Lake, and he actually had me come over to his place, and he had added a second story to his house for all of his Star Wars stuff. And I remember getting there, and I immediately when I saw it, I like this instant migraine hit me, and I almost started tearing up because I realized I had no hope at all of ever catching up to this guy. Like there's no way in hell I could have a collection that matched his. And this was back like in 1982 or something, or 83. So, but he was very nice. He always would give me something from the collection whenever I visited. Like, I remember one time he gave me a Japanese Y-wing, a little Y-wing. I can't remember if it was like a candy or a little tiny rubber figure or an eraser or something. You couldn't tell because it was all in Japanese, but it was always nice. They would give you a little trinket from the collection when you go over. So, but that's when I realized, I'm going to move on from collecting Star Wars because there's no way I'm going to catch up to him.
Yeah, well, it becomes almost overwhelming, doesn't it, after a while? I mean, I used to obviously play with the figures and whatever when I was a kid, and I always used, now I sort of feel sorry for my mum and dad, bless them, because all this stuff was quite expensive, and I know they didn't have a lot of money at the time. And of course, I lived up the road from the kid that had everything, so there was a kid up the road that had all of the vehicles and all of the play sets and like multiple stormtroopers and all of this stuff, whereas I just kind of had one of each character that came out and used to keep them in absolutely pristine condition. I mean, I didn't keep them in the box. I played with them, but I used to try and look after them, and they're probably in my parents' attic somewhere in a box to this day. So I quite like your idea, Simon, about buying the book of the collectibles so that you've almost like got a photograph of what you used to have to look back on. That's probably a better way of doing it. Yeah.
So, I mean, because as you say, there is no way to ever get everything. Because there's always more. There's always more stuff, and there's always different countries have different things as well, and you could just drive yourself to ruin sort of chasing this stuff. I actually saw a TV show over here. Can't remember the name of it, but they go in and they like clear out people's stuff to make room, and they did a Star Wars edition where this guy, his whole house was full of Star Wars stuff, pristine in the box, and he had he could have 3 or 4 of the same thing, and it just was cluttering the whole house. I mean, he had wife and kids as well. And in the end, they took all this stuff to a warehouse, and they didn't fill it, but they took up a lot of space with what he had, and they literally downsized him to a display room up in his attic. They did a really nice job, and it literally was it kind of stopped at the staircase to his attic. It couldn't go any further because his family had had enough. They were sick and tired of just being surrounded by all this stuff.
That's understandable. That is understandable. But Charles, you mentioned the whole sort of Shadows of the Empire thing that they tried to kick off, and I remember that very well as well. I mean, I remember there was even Joel McNeely had recorded a soundtrack to it when it wasn't even a film, you know, which was quite amazing. But I remember I sort of bought into all that because I sort of thought, well, this is because it's set between movies. That's kind of a really interesting time in the sort of Star Wars saga there and whatever. But what it struck me as is whereas because obviously it was a gap filler between two films, they couldn't really do anything too drastic with the characters and any sort of new characters that they introduced. You pretty much knew weren't going to be around for very long because they weren't in Return of the Jedi or whatever. So it seemed like a really good idea that didn't quite work to me. I don't know. Did you feel that way about it, you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I like I said before, I enjoyed parts of it. Like I really enjoyed the game. The soundtrack I thought was actually really good. It was just kind of like the story and characters were just kind of a little like not to my taste, I guess, to put it politely. I kind of thought the Prince Shizor or whatever his name was thing was kind of a little Star Trek-y for me. It didn't have the grit and the kind of used world vibe that Star Wars had. It started becoming a little bit more, I don't know, regal and kind of costumey. It just became less about like a space western and more of like just cosplay, with these characters. I mean, he was kind of like not my favoritely designed character, I have to say. And the whole notion of him being kind of like a seducer and having these pheromones that would blah blah blah. I just I'm like that's not Star Wars to me, and I just want to stick with like the characters I do like. And but again, it's like even though Dash Rendar was kind of like a Han Solo surrogate character for the game and for the book and everything, I was fine. I was okay with it because the gameplay was a lot of fun, and it was just I kind of feel like, well, if there was a compelling story to tell between Empire and Jedi, they would have made a movie out of it, and I kind of feel like the gap between Empire and Jedi was needed.
Yeah,
basically it was just about rendezvousing on Tatooine and rescuing Han. Like that's kind of what all that had to happen because they knew where Han was. You didn't have to do this whole side story of other planets and other things and all that. So anyway, long story short, it was fine. I just didn't really buy into it that heavily. Oh, and by the way, the other thing I want to mention though is like in the book, I remember this was a big turnoff for me. Was there was a foreword by George Lucas, and at the time, we were all under the belief there were going to be 9 episodes total, right? In the Skywalker saga, and in the opening foreword, George Lucas said that he was basically explaining what Shadows of the Empire was and how it fit, and he said, so this will be this will be an in-between story of the complete 6-film saga. And I was like, six films? What are you talking about? There's 9, So I felt like he was already kind of hedging and backing out of trying to complete the full saga back then.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the game, and it did feel like everything that was surrounding it was just a way of promoting the game. It was a sort of multimedia event that worked well for the game, just to push the game forward. So I had it on N64, and it's one of the things I kept pristine in the box, and actually sold for quite a bit of money. It was quite gratifying to know that this sort of old game people were still interested in, and was able to sort of to sell. But I mean, the game was great for the fact that you got to do the Battle of Hoth, and you got to jump into a snowspeeder and actually, for the first time feel like you were there, and doing the rope trick around the AT-AT around its legs and stuff. And so for that, I really enjoyed the game. There were some parts of it which I wasn't a fan of. I mean, the kind of like the swoop bikes section when you were going through Tatooine was I remember that not being that much fun. I think it was really difficult and you had to get through it. But the rest of the game I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I like that. If I'm remembering correctly, there was like a trash planet. Is that right? And there was a train that you had to like ride for a while.
That's right. Yeah.
And it actually turned IG-88 into dangerous character. Like I remember him he was like the super boss on the end of that level or whatever. And you know, going from being just basically a lamp in the corner on the Star Destroyer in Empire, he just kind of, you know, he's just standing there doing nothing, and then suddenly he's like this badass who's lobbing grenades at you and things. It was nice to see them turn him into a real character and not just a prop. That's
it. And I mean, also it was sort of it was nice. It was sort of there was what I'm trying to say is, because we had all these Super Star Wars games leading up to that on the N64. We had like Super Star Wars and Super Empire Strikes Back and then Super Return of the Jedi, the platform games. It was nice then to get a first person shooter that was like a big step up from Dark Forces.
Yeah. No, there was I think I played all the kind of console games up until, I don't know, I can't remember where I bowed out, but I think that Bounty Hunter was maybe the last game I really played all the way through. That was a Star Wars game, because that was actually a pretty fun game as well. And that was a game that proved you could take a Boba Fett character, even though it was Jango Fett in that game. You could take a Fett and make him a compelling protagonist, which I know a lot of people are wondering if there'll be a Boba Fett movie. How do you make him a compelling protagonist? And I thought that game actually did a pretty good job. But I think that was also the last Star Wars game I really, you know, stuck with. Not because I didn't like what came after. I just moved on from games for the most part. But,
I think the last one I played was, I think it certainly wasn't these Battlefront games, that's for sure. It was probably trying to think what the name of them was, but you had like this dark apprentice of Darth Vader who sort of turned against him, which they do a lot in these games. Usually you start off as a bad guy and then become a good guy. I can't remember what that game's called now.
Must have been great.
Fair enough. And I don't know about you guys, but there was always something, again, when you're a kid, I guess, time seems to go slower or whatever than it does once you're an adult. But, you know, there was always this massive anticipation between the films, and, you know, the fact that we had to wait 3 years, you know, to get the next installment. Obviously, nowadays we're spoilt and we get one every year. But, you know, I still, you know, even though I was into other things as well, I still remember I did get the Star Wars comics for quite some time in between those films, particularly in between New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. And, you know, but were you guys the same? Could you like not wait until the next film and sort of wanted to find your Star Wars fix somewhere, whether it was playing with the toys or reading the comics or what? Did you have that same sort of urge for that?
I mean, certainly. I remember after Empire opened and, you know, I saw it, and of course it ends on such a, you know, powerful cliffhanger. I remember, I mean, I can't believe I'm admitting this in public, but I had in school, I had what we used to call peachy folders. They're like these kind of like little yellow folders you keep your school papers in and things. And I actually made like a countdown calendar. I drew it by hand for every day, because I felt like I was like a prisoner in jail, marking my time until I was going to be released. I would X, you know, I'd X a box for every. I drew out all the boxes and then I X'd them each day until Jedi came out. I mean, that's how ridiculous I was about waiting for the next film, you know. And every single day I would just try to find something that, you know, keep me excited about it. And then, you know, the great thing is that Lucasfilm they were really great at the long form tease, you know, because like in the trade papers and Variety and the Hollywood Reporter, they released these beautiful, gorgeous, lavish foldouts for Revenge of the Jedi when they announced production was beginning. And I lost my mind because the logo was so different and it looked serious. It looked like, oh, this is something dangerous. It looked like this is like things are going to go dark, you know? And I had that thing on my wall like for years until the movie came out. And every once in a while they would come out with a new thing, you know, a piece of Ralph McQuarrie art or something. And then they were shooting, you know, they shot Jedi in America in terms for the locations. They shot in Yuma, Arizona and Crescent City, California. And so not so much in Crescent City because of the forest for Endor, but in Yuma for all the Tatooine stuff, you know, they built the sand barge, like half of it out in Yuma. And you have people who are like vacationing out there. They're on like dune buggies and ATVs and they see like this giant, like, you know, spaceship, but like a science fiction ship out in the middle of the desert. And they're like, what's that? So news started breaking. And even though there wasn't an internet, newspapers were picking it up. And even I think maybe some TV news picked up that, hey, they're shooting Star Wars movies here and you can go out and see them. So that was kind of fun, you know? And I had a friend living in Crescent City for the Endor shoot and he managed to get a hold of call sheets, right? And Blue Harvest T-shirts and stuff. I mean, he was feeding me stuff, you know, before Jedi opened. So I felt like I was kind of in the know in a very minor way, but it was still fun, you know, because back then, again, with no internet, you didn't have that sort of network. It was kind of like, you know, like a World War II kind of spy situation where you actually had to get stuff physically, you know, and it had to be snuck to you from the set and you couldn't just have it emailed to you. So it was a very fun time to kind of be deprived of Star Wars, frankly. Being deprived of it was fun because it just built up the expectation for when you actually got it. You know, it was like tantric sex, I guess you'd want to say. You know, it's like you're just kind of waiting for the climax.
Yes.
Well, myself, when Return of the Jedi came out, I was 6, going to turn 7, so I was really quite young. I don't think I knew what sort of anticipation was. The first time I heard about Return of the Jedi was I saw a TV show called Entertainment USA, and right at the end they went, oh, there's a new Star Wars coming out and here's the trailer. And, you know, I got to see, you know, these clips of what was going to come. I was like, oh, wow, you know, seeing C-3PO at the gates and Luke Skywalker jumping onto the barge. And I remember it was very much, the images I remember from that trailer were very much of the stuff that happens on Tatooine. And I was like, wow, this looks amazing. It's like Luke Skywalker scaling up a wall or something, you know. And but I didn't so it was from that point onwards, and I think it was only like maybe 3 or 4 months before the film actually came out where I was aware of its existence, because I still had Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. I mean, certainly Star Wars was on the TV and I had a VHS copy, and I'd seen both films many times, and like Keith, I had the comic books, and so that was all keeping me kind of entertained. So to have this new movie come along was great. But then when Return of the Jedi came out and that was it, then you did kind of feel this void, you know. It's like, oh, is that it? There's not going to be anything else. You know, you go, oh. But then I think nothing else would have been better than what we got with the prequels.
Yes. Do you have an opinion on the prequels, Charles?
Oh, many. I don't think we have the time for that. It's funny though, because I've I don't know, I've adopted a kinder approach to the prequels of late. You know, when I saw them, I was furious, and I felt betrayed by Star Wars, and I was just like getting ready to just burn my Star Wars fan club card. But it took a while to kind of realize, it's a separate thing, and there's a whole generation of kids that actually do like them and like those stories, and I feel like, I had my time with it. I had my trilogy that I grew up with. Why not let these kids have this trilogy if they really do enjoy it? and frankly, people love to rank the films, like which one is better than the other. And I've really come to kind of maybe a semi-controversial opinion, which is that I actually think Phantom Menace is the best of the three, which I think a lot of people think I'm nuts to say that. But here's my reasoning is I feel like the Phantom Menace of all of them is the only one that's sort of pure, uncut George Lucas. It's like he had no feedback. He was just doing what he wanted to do. And everyone around him was along for the ride because they felt like, well, he must know what he's doing. He's the master. And so he made the film that he wanted to make with absolutely no audience feedback and no backlash or nothing. And then Attack of the Clones to me is complete, like it just feels like a course correction movie. And it feels like it's just kind of pandering to fans, like, oh, you like Boba Fett, here's Jango Fett, and you like this, here's that, and it's darker and it's more quote unquote edgy and all that. And it just felt like it was just reacting to the backlash of Phantom Menace. And then Revenge of the Sith to me is the one that is actually I think Attack of the Clones is easily the worst of all the Star Wars films, but I think Revenge of the Sith is kind of the most painful because it had the juiciest story to tell. It's like they kind of wasted a lot of time with 1 and 2, with all of like these other kind of side stories and things, which, ultimately serve that trilogy. But I don't think it's what we as fans maybe signed up for when we heard there was a new trilogy on the way. Revenge of the Sith had the juiciest story to tell because it had to basically tell so much story that had been ignored in 1 and 2 for the most part. It had to, tell so much story about the fall of Anakin Skywalker, the rise of Darth Vader, the clash between Obi-Wan and Anakin, and it had so much that it kind of, I felt like it felt like very abridged, and it felt kind of sketchy versus being a deeply engaging kind of climax of that first trilogy. Because I think we all imagined as kids what the prequels in our heads would be like, because we had heard, through various other sources, like some of the novelization of Jedi mentioned the lava consuming Vader, during when his duel with Obi-Wan. And so that was sort of like, okay, they're fighting against lava. And you start to imagine these things because you're a kid and Star Wars excites you. Then you actually see it, and it's this kind of really video gamey, cartoony, like, let's, swing across chasms of lava and let's jump on these little droids and fight. And it just became kind of like not that really pure good versus evil battle that I think a lot of people were hoping for. It just felt like he was trying to throw eye candy at you and then get as quickly out of that plot as possible. Because like when Yoda fights Palpatine, and then, it's a pretty knockdown, drag-out fight, but Yoda escapes, and then he immediately says, into exile I must go. And I'm like, wait, get back up there. You can still fight. Get back in there and still, go back and fight him some more. And just like, it was such a pop-out. Like, everything was such an easy out in Revenge of the Sith, and that kind of really was disappointing because I felt it had the most potential because it had so much story. It was going to be I felt like it was going to be jam-packed with all the good stuff because 1 and 2 kind of ignored the good stuff. And then we got kind of like a partial pass at it, and it felt like we missed an opportunity there. But that's me. I'm a bitter old Star Wars fan, so that's my take.
Yes, yeah. Well, we have plenty to say about it in our next episode of the podcast where we go into it. But Charles, what was your initial? What did you first feel about the special editions?
When I first heard about them, I thought the idea was sound. I thought it was a good idea to go in and, recomposite visual effects elements and digitally clean it up. And then, we started hearing about, they're going to shoot some new scenes. They're going to add some new this and that. They're going to put in Jabba. And, then I started to wonder, well, okay, I trust them. Let's see how it goes. And I got invited to a test screening at the Star Wars Special Edition. I don't know, it was a few months before it opened. And so it wasn't quite finished yet, but it was basically a big promotional event because they wanted to get a bunch of fans there and then like videotape them reacting to the new cut and then interview us on the way out. And you could tell like the reaction was very divided. People were excited to see Star Wars again on the big screen, no doubt about it. But the changes, I think, ran the spectrum between, yeah, that's a good tweak, to that was a completely unnecessary error that you introduced into this, like the Jabba scene with cutting and pasting Harrison Ford to walk over his tail was just like so ridiculous. And I'm sure maybe someone thought that was a good idea at some point because they did it, and they did it again when they took another pass at it for the DVD or the Blu-ray or whatever. So it's just like, I just wish that they had taken a bit more of a restorationist approach and not a revisionist approach. I felt like there's a lot of just tweaking and playing and kind of goofing off with the material to do it, to make it different and to make a trailer that would get people to come out and see it again. Versus what, like, for instance, when I worked on Blade Runner for the final cut, I told everyone, I said, we're going to do the exact opposite of what they did with the Star Wars special editions, which is we're going to take a very fine tooth comb to this thing, and we're going to be very delicate. And everything we change, we're going to have a really good reason to do it, and it's going to serve the story and the character. We're not going to do it just to do it. And I felt like we came out of the Blade Runner experience in good shape because we were so there's over 100 picture changes in the final cut versus the previous versions, and I doubt most people will catch like all of them. I bet people catch maybe like 10 or 12 of the 100 changes we made. And that to me is a success because we didn't want people to spot it. We wanted to polish the film and fix mistakes, not introduce a bunch of new things that'll take you out of the experience.
Exactly. With Blade Runner, they did exactly that. They fixed things, continuity things and little mistakes, and just made it all tighter and just work better without drawing attention to anything. Whereas with the special editions, yes, they cleaned everything up, which was great, but they felt the necessity to add all these elements, and not only to add them for the special edition, but then to keep on adding and messing with it, forever. I mean, the most controversial being the Greedo shooting first thing, which I always thought was ridiculous. I hated that and still do. But then there are little things that they did that are barely noticeable that I thought was great. For example, the power indicator on the tractor beam when Obi-Wan's trying to disable it. Obviously, in the original cut, it had power and whatever written in English, and tractor beam written in English and everything. Whereas they went in and they changed it to the sort of the hieroglyphs that the Aruba or whatever they call the Star Wars language is, and you still understand exactly what it means, but it's one of those fixes that most people wouldn't even notice, which worked, as opposed to a major change like Greedo shooting first, which was terrible. So that's the difference between restoring and polishing something as opposed to actually trying to change the narrative of certain things, which is what they seem to do with some of the special edition choices. And it was funny because again, there were some things that they didn't change, like initially with the Empire Strikes Back special edition, they didn't replace the Emperor hologram with Ian McDiarmid, and to me, that would have been an obvious change that would have made sense from a continuity point of view. I know they eventually did it when it went to DVD, but they didn't do it with the initial special edition. And that was one of those things that I was expecting them to change, and they didn't. Instead, they gave us more Wampa, which I felt like we didn't really want. So it was weird. Yeah.
Well, I remember there was great excitement amongst the Star Wars community. We were going to get to see stuff put back in that had been cut out that we always wanted to see. We assumed that a lot of the Tatooine stuff with Luke and Biggs was going to be put back in. And, and also we wanted to see the Jabba scene because we knew about it. And so when it came out, I was very happy of seeing it again on the big screen. Again, I went down to the Odeon Leicester Square to see it, and especially Star Wars, it was a great experience because it was like seeing it with an American audience. There was cheering and there was people laughing, and making comments, and you know, it was all great fun. But of course, you know, once you get past that and you're looking at it with, you know, you're going, well, okay, some of this stuff is not needed. The Jabba scene, yeah, it definitely doesn't be needed because Greedo says exactly the same thing as Jabba does. So we're just getting a repeat of the same information, which we don't need. You know, why would Jabba come down if he's already sent a subordinate to come down and, you know, tell Han the same stuff? So, you know, it didn't make any sense apart from a bit of fan service. Say, look, here's Jabba. Oh, look, and there's Boba Fett. You know, there you go. He's in all 3 films now. You know, we got a little bit extra Biggs in the first one when they're on the base at Yavin, and you sort of see Biggs a bit more in those scenes, and I quite glad to see him. But it was a shame we didn't get much of the Tatooine stuff at the beginning, because we'd seen that in the comic books and in the novelization, and you know, it would have been cool to have actually, you know, seen that put back into the film.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with that big scene at Yavin, it did feel, because we didn't get the stuff at Tatooine at the beginning, that Yavin scene did to me feel a little redundant as a result of that, because it didn't really have anything to pay off on, if you know what I mean. But yeah. I mean, yes, it was nice to have the addition, I guess. Yeah. But
and just sort of say about with Empire, with the whole sort of Wampa stuff, we wanted to see the actual Wampas attacking the Rebel base, or the whole thing with C-3PO taking the sign off, and the snowtroopers going into that room that had been been sealed because of these Wampas. And of course, now having seen that extra footage, found out it's not that great, so it was kind of a good thing they didn't put it back in. But yes, I agree, the whole sort of extra Wampa stuff in Empire was a bit yeah, it's just, you know, we saw enough from the original for him to be such a threat that we didn't need to have all this extra, you know, stuff put in. I mean,
it doesn't really match.
No,
that's the other problem with it. Yeah. It doesn't really match. It's like,
and you know, the bit at the end of Empire with Darth Vader doing his whole "get me my shuttle," you know, and then you see him boarding the shuttle and the shuttle flying up. It's like, yeah, okay, we get that. I was funny because when I went to see Return the Jedi, I think it was this weird thing where there was a lot of anticipation for Star Wars, and then not many people, I think people came out for Empire, but when Return of the Jedi came out, it was like it went very quickly. It didn't hang around so much as the other films did in the cinema. I mean, I actually had to catch it at a multiplex on a Saturday morning. You know, that was how much out the door it was when I got to see it. And again, I enjoyed it. Return of the Jedi was the film I can remember seeing the first time at the cinema. And but yeah, some of the changes in it, I mean, like the music, the song in Jabba's palace. It's like,
don't get me started.
Yeah, we didn't really need that. Yeah, and then of course the additions they've made since just keep making it worse. I mean, the whole no at the end of Jedi, and the whole thing with like hiding R2-D2 behind a bigger rock.
Again, stupid.
Yeah. Just change for change's sake.
Yeah. What about you, Charles? What do you think about you mentioned a little bit about New Hope, but what did you think of the Empire and Jedi changes?
Well, for me, Empire's changes were the most painful because Empire was already a perfect movie, you know, and I think anything you do hurts the film. I don't like, for instance, when I was a kid, I never sat there scratching my head thinking, gee, how did Darth Vader get the shuttle and then get the executor before the Falcon did? I never ever thought that, because the movie is moving at such a fast clip, not just in terms of pace, but also emotion, that I don't need to see the logistics of, you know, the shuttle and all that. And I feel like that's actually something that cursed the prequels a bit, was tons of takeoffs and landings. Like, there are so many takeoffs and landings. And I kind of started to formulate a theory, which I'm not going to share completely with you right now, but I'll just say that I think the Star Wars films, the original 6 that George Lucas produced, are autobiographical. I mean, I think Star Wars is certainly, you know, about a young kid, you know, growing up in Modesto, and he wants to kind of like take on the Hollywood establishment, and he gets into a car crash and it changes his life, and then he, you know, goes off and tries to find a new way forward. He's like our new hope. And that you can actually look at Empire and Jedi and kind of break it down in similar ways that reflect his life, right? The prequels, I started thinking, what was George Lucas's life like leading up to the prequels? And I feel like by that point, he was running a multi-billion-dollar company. He was a multi-billionaire. And between the original trilogy and the prequels, I'm sure Lucasfilm, you know, they did obviously with like Industrial Light and Magic and Skywalker Sound, they did a lot of great work on other movies. But when it came to Star Wars, it was basically licensing, right? It was basically just toys and shirts and books and music and whatever. So that's what kept the money coming in. And I imagine George's, you know, responsibilities for the most part, and this is a sweeping generalization that I'm pulling out of my ass. I can't claim to say that this is really what happened, but I was imagining that his day would be driving to the ranch, getting out of his car, going in for a meeting, taking meetings all day, getting in his car and driving home. And I thought that's why the prequels are filled with takeoff and meetings, the meetings, you know. And I think that reflects his life, you know, in the prequel era.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean there.
Yeah, that's a good theory.
I mean, for me, I agree with you, Charles. Empire didn't need any changing because it was perfect anyway. And like you said, one line, get my ship, is all you need. You don't need all the rest of it. So I didn't really think, and again, they've removed it again since. But Luke, when he has the confrontation with Darth Vader and goes down the Bespin react shaft thing, they put in him going, ah, and I was like, oh no, why did they do that? It made it look like he slipped and fell or something, you know. But then I noticed in the DVD editions they took that out again, so so he realised the error of his ways there. But yeah, Jedi, you know, I hate most of the changes in that. I hate the fact that they turned like the Sarlacc into the creature from the Little Shop of Horrors or whatever. That to me made no sense. It made much more sense to be this dormant creature that lies there and just digests slowly, you know, as opposed to having to see it come out of the pit, as it were. So I didn't like that. The Jedi rocks thing in the palace and Boba Fett being a playboy and all that stuff, again, that just makes me want to puke. And apart from the Ewoks blinking, I don't understand why they have to sort of change the song at the end at all, because I thought, you know, what they'd done previously was fine. So you know, that to me seemed a bit sort of redundant. It almost felt like they were making changes because they felt like they had to, rather than whether they actually needed to. But
well, I really quickly, I just, while we're on the music thing, I just think there was a bit of a negative opinion of the original Yub Nub Ewok song in the original versions. And I will say that the Jedi Special Edition has two things I actually do like. I like the Bantha herd that we see out in the desert before Jabba's sail barge kind of appears. I think that's
agreed. I like that.
And even though I'm not a fan of the montage at the end of seeing all the different planets celebrating, which I don't think makes any sense from a story point of view, I do think John Williams' new Q, Victory Celebration, is lovely. I think it's a more beautiful, kind of almost spiritual way to end the trilogy versus just Ewoks singing. So I think the music is great. I think the montage is off because I feel like, okay, so the Emperor's dead, Vader's dead, they destroyed a Death Star, the Empire took a big hit. However, for the Empire to really be the Empire, they have to have all kinds of armadas and stations and other generals and governors and things throughout the galaxy, that even though this was a major blow against the Empire, it's not like the entire empire is going to collapse, right? There's going to be a power vacuum and other guys are going to take over, and Coruscant is not going to flip overnight. So it just seemed a little, again, too cutesy and too tidy.
I agree.
And yeah. I get it. I get it as a nice, tidy like bow to put on the whole thing, but it just felt like unnecessary. And I do think the music was a better choice, but the actual picture we saw with it, maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And my problem with Jedi was always that, you know, it seemed to be tied up in a neat bow. You know, where the galaxy should be vast, and you know these problems would continue. So yeah, I mean, in terms of, you mentioned the music, I mean, John, whether we're talking about the original trilogy or the prequels, I can never fault anything that John Williams has done with these films, because the music across all of them is absolutely fantastic. And I even think that with Force Awakens as well. Some people have said, "Oh, the music's not as good in Force Awakens," but I don't agree. I think there's some great, you know, Rey's theme that they've got in that is fantastic. Likewise, people, you know, don't like the prequels, but the love theme in the prequels and the Jedi themes and everything are absolutely fantastic. So I can never fault Mr. Williams. Ever.
Duel of the Fates is a great track.
Fabulous.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, you know, it's one of the things that's always bolstered these films is the John Williams soundtrack. I mean, Empire was the first soundtrack I ever owned on tape. And I must have listened to that soundtrack 100 times. But another first, absolutely. Yeah. I think Star Wars or Empire was probably the first soundtrack I ever had as well. So yes, it just adds to that long list of firsts that I mentioned at the beginning. But yeah, absolutely.
Well, my first soundtrack was Jaws, so it's still John Williams. But I remember I didn't know what a soundtrack was before Jaws, and I thought I would just hear the movie and the dialogue, and when it was just the music, it was such a whole new experience. So that naturally, when that Star Wars double LP came out, I had to have it, and then of course. Actually, this is kind of a funny story. So, you know, the first Star Wars soundtrack when it came out in 77 or 78, whenever it came out, was a double LP. And then when the Empire Strikes Back soundtrack came out, it was a double LP. But Jedi was a single LP. And I remember being at a convention with producer Howard Kazanjian, and he was doing kind of a sneak peek of what was then Revenge of the Jedi. And someone asked him, is the Jedi soundtrack going to be another double LP? And he said, no, it's just going to be a single LP. And the whole place started booing and hissing. And then his response to that was, but you can buy 2 records. And like the place almost just like completely like tore the seats out. It was just like, it was like, that's how much people loved Star Wars music when they heard they were getting half of what they were going to previously get. But I think the Jedi score is actually beautiful. I think, and you're right, I agree with both of you. Like, everything John Williams does, you can't fault him. I mean, even his lesser scores are better than most people's best scores. So, and the Force Awakens score has grown on me. I mean, when I first heard it, I was kind of like, yeah, it might not be up to snuff, but Rey's theme, and there's quite a few other cues on there. The Jedi steps at the end, I think, is a beautiful cue. So, you know, it's you just have to remember that I think when we were kids, our brains were more, you know, malleable, and when we hear a score or a cue or a tiny little theme, a motif, like Boba Fett's kind of like barely there motif in the Empire score, that registers with our brain like it's a full-blown A-list hero score. And then you hear the same thing today as adults, and we're like, it doesn't really register. Well, that's because our brains are kind of set in their ways. You know, kids probably, you know. Yeah,
we were less cynical as well back then.
Yeah.
You know, we used to take the movies for what they were and sort of necessarily analyze them in the same way that we do nowadays as fans and filmmakers and adults. But absolutely.
But I want to say that, you know, the late 70s and 80s was a golden time for soundtracks, because, you know, take I remember as a kid in the playground, you know, you had a theme tune for everything. So if you were Superman, you had Superman, or if you were Star Wars, you had the Star Wars theme. You know, imagine kids trying to be, you know, being Superman now with the Man of Steel theme. Try humming that.
Yes. Well, so much so that they're going back to the Williams cue in the latest film. But yeah. The music definitely can't be faulted. So, Charles, beyond obviously we've talked about, well, we've even touched on the prequels as well as the original trilogy and the special editions. You know, beyond that, how are your feelings on the Star Wars movies that we're getting now? Obviously, you haven't seen the latest one yet, but the two that we've had, you know, what's been your thoughts on those?
Well, I mean, I'm really curious to see where they go. I think it's a really bold and dangerous and exciting sort of mission they've set out for themselves. I'm seeing The Last Jedi a week from today, which as we're recording this. So I'm actually really excited to see what Rian Johnson does, because I think he's a very interesting filmmaker, and I really do hope that Disney and Lucasfilm continue to explore using independent filmmakers, not necessarily big studio directors that, you know, are used to this type of kind of like big budget, big, you know, type of filmmaking. Because I think I tweeted about this a while ago, which was, I wonder what the reaction would have been had the internet existed or a Twitter existed in 1979 or 1981 or 82, when they announced Irvin Kershner as the director of Empire and Richard Marquand as the director of Jedi. People would be probably like saying, huh? Who are these guys? Because they weren't A-list household name directors. They were very interesting indie or journeyman directors, you know. And I think that worked great with Empire. And with Jedi, it was a different situation, because I think George took more control over Jedi because Empire went a little bit out of control, which frankly, I think why it's a more interesting movie. But I really hope that the powers that be continue to look at indie directors from different backgrounds. I mean, I know that's kind of backfired on a couple other selections, because, I mean, again, it's kind of weird that we're seeing these public firings or these directors are being let go. But I don't think that should dissuade them from taking chances, because George took an amazing amount of chances with the original trilogy and even the prequels. I mean, he was always taking chances. He was always rolling the dice. He was always doing crazy things. That's why I think Star Wars is so amazing, and Indiana Jones and everything else he did, because he was always trying to do something different and go against what made common conventional sense. And I hope that the new Star Wars films don't fall into that trap of being just Hollywood conventional sense movies that a committee agreed upon and it ticks off all the boxes and gets them all the numbers they're looking for. I hope they take chances. And I feel like they sort of are taking chances, except when it blows up and then they go for someone safe, like Colin Trevorrow on Episode 9. That was an interesting choice. It's not one I would have, you know, picked out of a hat, but the fact that it went to J.J. Abrams seems like, okay, we took a chance and that didn't work for us. Now we're going to go with a known commodity, a closer, basically. And I get it. I just hope that doesn't continue. It's like, I hope they still take chances. Like, that's my big message to anyone listening, that for all the ongoing Star Wars films, the Lucasfilm 2.0 movies, I feel like I just don't want them to, you know, become boring or expected or the usual. And I'm really excited about Rian Johnson doing a new trilogy that has nothing to do with the Skywalker family story, you know, and I'm really curious to see what that is and how that develops, because I think the Star Wars universe is rich with possibilities. And a lot of times you think, well, if they're just going to do like a Han Solo movie or a Rogue One or a Boba Fett movie or whatever, they're going to run out of ideas pretty fast, because Star Wars doesn't quite have the deep bench that, say, Marvel has. Like, Marvel has so many A, B, C, D list characters that they can throw at stories, because Iron Man wasn't an A-list Marvel character, you know, and they turned him into a franchise. So that's why I think the Rian Johnson trilogy, it'll be very interesting to see, because it might give Star Wars a whole new life beyond what we even understand at this point, and that's extremely exciting.
Yeah. And what about what have your thoughts been on the? I mean, you touched on it very briefly there, but on the anthology movies, I mean, you know, do you think those ones are a good idea, or do you think they should just go the route of new trilogies rather than these odd anthology type films?
You know, I don't know. I think we need to see more of this kind of template that they're building. I think that Rogue One got a lot of stuff right, and I mean that whole ending with Vader was some of the most exciting Star Wars I'd seen since Empire. Frankly, I mean that was the Vader we always wanted to see, and we never really did get to see. So that was great, and I think that the sort of the look and the feel and the texture of Rogue One felt authentic, and it felt like legit old school Star Wars to me. So I'm always happy to see that. I mean, you know, again, because like we said, we're all kind of bitter old cynical Star Wars fans. It's like we can nitpick these things till the cows come home. But I think that I'm trying to look at the positive in everything, and that's why I'm really curious to see Last Jedi, because now we're going to get to see if the Rey, Finn, Poe, you know, storyline is worth following till the end. And of course, yes, we're going to watch all of them. We're going to be there opening day for all of them. There's no doubt about that. But will it rank with the Luke, Han, and Leia, you know, group? We certainly know Luke, Han, and Leia are more interesting and more compelling than the Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme situation. But I'm curious if the new guys will leave us with a trilogy that stands up with the original trilogy. You know, I think it's too early to say, but it's hopeful. I mean, I was really impressed with Force Awakens in terms of how quickly I became engaged by the characters and how quickly I liked them and that I was interested in them. Even Kylo Ren, I thought, you know, was a really compelling, you know, kind of a hipster whiner villain, you know, but that's fine because that's what kids are today. It's like these films should reflect the current generation, and I was really impressed with how Force Awakens got the characters right. It got kind of like the heart and the tone right really well. I had some issues with the world building and textures and design, and again, stupid geeky stuff that most people don't care about. But I think Rogue One did the opposite. Rogue One got the world right, and maybe the characters could have been better. You know, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed for Last Jedi that they bring it all together. You know, for the first time in this.
Yeah. Yeah, I seem to remember, I don't know whether it was you said or someone else who said, but I thought it was a really good point that the only disappointment, the only thing they feel robbed is the fact that you're not going to get Han and Luke together on screen again. Was it you said that, or was it someone else I was speaking to? I can't remember. But that's unless we have some flashback or anything, that's going to be unlikely now, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It's like I that is a big regret that we're not going to see. You know, I assume we're not going to see those two guys together. I don't think Han is force sensitive to have a ghost back, but I think that you know, again, you can Monday morning quarterback these things till the end, and then you can keep thinking that J.J. Abrams should have included, you know, Luke in the final confrontation between Kylo and Rey. Like the red and the my visual before even I saw Force Awakens was, you know, Kylo's red blade, Rey's blue blade, and then they're kind of at an impasse. They kind of clash. There's like no clear winner. They're gonna, you know, basically kill each other. And then in the distance between the kind of the X of the two blades, a green lightsaber lights up, and then Luke is there because he felt in the Force something was wrong and he had to come here. And then it's like, okay, at least Han is let's say Han is mortally wounded. He gets as far as, you know, Chewie carries him to the Falcon. He doesn't fall off the catwalk. And then at least Han and Luke have one scene together where they could even do a riff on the Jedi Jabba's skipped bit with like, or Jabba's palace bit with, you know, how we doing? Same as always. That bad, huh? I mean, like have that little bit of a, you know, but maybe flip the lines where the other character says it. But yeah, again, that's all like fan wank, you know. That's all kind of like, yeah, we want to nitpick the movie. We want to make it seem like, you know, we had a part of it. But I think That's my only regret. It's like Han and Luke won't be reunited, and I hope in Last Jedi, I hope at least Luke and Leia have a reunion. You know, I mean, that's not guaranteed either. We don't know that from anything we've seen in the trailers or anything. So hopefully they have a moment or they have something together. And then, by the way, this is going to be devastating because I mean, the death of Carrie Fisher really hurt. I mean, I don't really get that upset about the passing of celebrities because they're not personal friends, they're not family. But that one hurt because as you know, we talked about earlier, it's like, you know, Princess Leia was an early crush for a lot of us, you know, and I think that, you know, I did have a bit of weird, distant love for Carrie Fisher via her, you know, role as Princess Leia, and I that really hurts. So it's gonna, every time I see her in a trailer, I know when I see this movie, her first scene, I'm gonna be bawling my eyes out, and her last scene, I'm gonna be bawling my eyes out, you know, and I hope I can survive this first screening because I know it's gonna hurt.
Yeah. No, definitely. Like I said, first crush, you know. But no, it's going to be interesting to see where that all goes for sure. And I always like that line in Jedi where, you know, Han and Luke have that exchange about how we doing, and, you know, same as usual, that bad her, because, you know, that used to really make you realize that, you know, they had many adventures between Star Wars and Empire as well, you know, and you really felt that there was that sort of, they had that history and they'd done a load of stuff which used to sort of blow my headcanon mind, you know. I used to think, that's awesome. And yeah, I mean, Rogue One for me was, this time last year, was just like a massive treat. You know, I'd never been so excited in a climax of a film at a cinema in a long time, and I had just the biggest smile on my face for that whole Darth Vader kicks ass scene, you know. And you're right, we'd been wanting to see that ever since like Empire Strikes Back, really, you know. So yeah, that totally worked, and I was very happy. Are you into any of this expanded universe stuff in terms of Clone Wars or Rebels or anything like that, or have you not really sort of invested time into all of that stuff as well?
I've sampled it. I have not seen every episode of Clone Wars or Rebels. I've seen a few, and like my friend Steve Melchin's was one of the writers on Rebels, so it's like I felt a need to at least, you know, see some of his work and, like, you know, support. But I kind of just it's not that I'm not interested. I just have other things I want to spend my time on. You know, I feel like I've given Star Wars a huge chunk of my life. I feel like I can now take some time to myself, and we're trying to work on my own things and explore other parts of the world, not just Star Wars, not just movies, but life. You know, there's a whole big world out there, and if I were to sit and watch every single Star Wars thing, because there's so much, it's like, it's not just the merchandise, it's the content. There's so much stuff being produced that we'd never get anything done, you know. So it's like I'm excited that people love it. I'm really happy that there's fans for Rebels and Clone Wars, and everything else is yet to come. I'm sure there's going to be a TV series soon, and probably more animation. And I'll always be curious, like, if they have a concept that I feel really speaks to me, I'll jump in. Sure, I'll check out everything, and then if it feels like it's connecting, I'll stick with it. And if not, I'll say, well, that was, you know, it was interesting. I'm glad they took a shot at it, and hopefully it finds an audience. You know, I mean, I'm never negative. It's like I'm always hoping these things work. It's a matter of time, frankly. It's like when you talk about TV shows in general, we're in like this amazing golden age of television where there's just so many TV shows, and you keep saying, yeah, I got to add that to my list, or I got to add that, you know, I got to binge that. And it's just like, we're spending all of our time watching awesome television, but we're not really living our lives. So that's my message of the day. It's like
I think that's an absolutely fabulous sentiment, and I agree wholeheartedly with everything you're saying there, and you're mirroring my own feelings, because I almost feel that there's too much to keep up with, which is actually a nice problem to have, but right, like you said, we've got to get on with our lives in the meantime. So a very good point there.
I mean, do you guys follow the expanded universe and everything else?
Well, I'm currently watching Rebels. I have like the first 3 seasons on Blu-ray, and me and my girlfriend we really enjoy it. So yeah, it's a very decent show. When it first came out, it did look very sort of child friendly. It sort of looked very kiddie, but actually watching it, it has grown on me, and there's some serious storylines in there, and it's all to do with the building of the rebellion. So yes. it's sort of those building blocks. So it's been quite enjoyable. I mean, we sort of space them out a bit just so we can, we don't watch them all in one. We always have like an episode to watch every weekend. And so, but yeah, sort of enjoying it. And I mean, I've seen a lot of Clone Wars when they were on Sky One. And again, there were some good storylines in that. But it was all right. But I mean, back in the 90s, I did Expanded Universe in a big way, comics, books, whole lot of stuff.
All of which was a waste of time now because they're legends anyway.
Yes,
but there you
yeah,
go. Now,
yeah.
I mean, I'm the same. I'm a big fan of Rebels. Actually, I think Dave Filoni, who's the runner of that's done an incredibly fantastic job with that series, and it is very, very enjoyable. So I'm into Rebels. The Clone Wars I've not seen much of, I must admit. I did see the original, the older animation hand-drawn cartoon ones that came out. I had a DVD set with those, and I watched those. Those were pretty good. And then they released the movie to tie in with the series of the Clone Wars theatrically, and that was very kiddified, and I was kind of somewhat disappointed. So I didn't really bother with the rest of the Clone Wars. But I've heard through other podcasts and whatever that there is actually some really good stuff in there, and it is bought by the same people who are doing Rebels now. So so maybe again adding to a long list that seems to grow quicker than it shrinks. Maybe I'll get into the Clone Wars at some point, but at the moment it's just been the Rebels series and obviously the movies. And I have to mention this just because back in the day I was an absolute mega fan of the radio drama of Star Wars. I still think directed by John Madden and written by Brian Daley, I still think that even by today's standards, they hold up incredibly well. And in my head canon, definitely some of the stuff in that is canon to me, even though, it's not official canon now because Rogue One has changed a few things from it. And even back with the special editions, they started to move away from what they'd set up with the radio dramas. For example, the controversial Jabba scene that we've already talked about. In the audio drama, it isn't Jabba, it's one of Jabba's henchmen called Heater, who goes to confront Han and Chewbacca at the docking bay. And Heater actually says, listen, if you don't pay us, we won't just send another Greedo on your tail. Next time we'll hire Boba Fett himself. And again, I always thought that was amazing because it made Boba Fett this larger than life, mysterious character. And I kind of felt that when they did the special edition and he just happened to be there in Jabba's posse, it was like, I thought the audio drama actually handled that better. But again, that's just my sad, geeky headcanon stuff. But I have big love for that.
Yeah, I loved the radio shows. I thought they were great. And I love that they had to they forced you to use your imagination to visualize the scenes that weren't in the movies. You could sort of take the visual DNA of what you know from the movies, but you had to kind of create and visualize your own, worlds for these little side stories and things that appeared in the radio drama. So I always look forward to them. I would just literally turn off the lights in my bedroom and just like listen to the radio, and it was a kind of a magical thing, actually. And then it kind of kept it alive, because back then we weren't quite in like, you know, the home video era. I mean, we did have obviously like some VHS and stuff, but it wasn't quite as prevalent as today. So it was another way of keeping it alive.
Absolutely, agreed. And of course, you know, they had many scenes that weren't in movies, you know, intertwined within the storyline, and also they had things from other characters' point of view. So, for example, the bit when the Millennium Falcon is taken onto the Death Star in New Hope. You know, we get that as a reveal with Han and Luke and everybody being under the deck plates. But in the audio drama, they do it from the viewpoint of the Millennium Falcon passengers. So they're all arguing about what they're going to do, and you know, they're trying to get into the deck plates. They're moaning because there's not a lot of room there, and there's all this anticipation, and you know, they're trying to shut C-3PO up because he like has a fit when they hear there's stormtroopers and all this sort of stuff, and I love that, because in my head I think, well, that's what was going on the bits that we didn't see in the movie, you know, and it all makes total sense and works. So yeah, I need to get a life. I know.
I mean, just wait until the Disney parks, you know, open the Galaxy Edge, you know, world. You have to go in person and visit Star Wars, and you know, go to Florida or Anaheim and get immersed in it in real life, because that's going to be a whole new thing. I don't know if you guys are following that at all, like the whole Disneyland and Disney World Star Wars parks, but it's pretty amazing what it seems like they're coming up with. In that they're going to be experiences tailored just for you, and it's going to continue on with like the Star Wars hotel that they'll make, where it's kind of like you're going to be living almost like a role-playing game. It's going to be like David Fincher's The Game, except Star Wars. You know, it's going to be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I was in Florida last month, actually, and you know, obviously they've got quite a bit of stuff promoting that for when it comes, and I just, you know, it just makes me want to be a kid again. I'm like, oh no, I so want to be a child and just do this stuff again. But yeah, something to look forward to for sure.
Yeah.
I bet it'll be expensive though.
Oh, of course. And we'll spend the money, as we always do.
Indeed. Well, I think that's a good place to end it.
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Charles, where can people find out more about yourself and your work?
Well, if you can spell my name correctly, you can just Google me or whatever. But I mean, I'm on Twitter at Lauzirika, Lauz or Zirika, and you know, Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff, and just I don't know, if you care about what I do, you can just search it up. It's kind of weird. I always feel bizarre promoting myself on social media when it's like, if you care, you can just look me up. But there you go. That's my half-assed.
You've done so much, though. I mean, you know, any aspiring filmmakers need to look at your documentaries that you've done on those films. You know what I mean? So people should look you up, and they should check out your work for sure. And we're really pleased to have had you on as a guest. So thank you, Charles.
I appreciate you guys having me. And if I can just do one little bit of self-promotion, by the time this is on, it'll probably already be out, but I have a little piece of the new Twin Peaks box set, the new television show, the 2017 series. I have a little half-hour piece that I shot and put together from the set, which it would turn out to be kind of a lot of fun. So I hope if there are any Twin Peaks fans out there, to check out the new box set that's coming out tomorrow here as we record this. But it should be out soon everywhere else.
It was released in the UK today. Actually, it is actually in blue DVD and Blu-ray stores today here in the UK.
Great. Well, there you go.
It says contains over 5 hours of bonus features. I haven't bought it yet, but
you have to get the Blu-ray, because the Blu-ray has I think it's 8 hours. The Blu-ray has like an hour and a half more that the DVD doesn't have. So make sure you get my stuff is on the Blu-ray, not on the DVD. So be sure you get the Blu-ray.
There you go.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
And Keith,
that's a whole nother podcast.
So, Keith, where can people find your work?
Okay, if you go onto YouTube and put in British Isles, spelled EYLES, as in my last name, there's some short films there that I've made. Otherwise, if you check out my name on IMDb, you can see other things I've been involved in, or you can get in touch via the podcast.
And as always, you can find my work on independentrunnings.com. You can listen to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and all good podcast providers. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Movie Heaven, Movie Hell. And please leave us a review and rating on iTunes and Stitcher. It all helps. So that just leaves me to thank Charles again for coming on.
Thank you.
And we hope that you join us for the next episode of Movie Heaven, Movie Hell.